basis for the whole operation is problematic. And then, yes, of course, Congress has the power to declare war in our Constitution, and there has been no either declaration of war or specific authorization by Congress to use military force here. And so this is also arguably a sort of a power grab by the executive, by the president vis-a-vis Congress, and should be very concerning to Congress. So yes, Congress should be doing much more.
Laura, let's begin then with Donald Trump versus Venezuela. And the focal point seems to have become one incident. There have been more than 20 strikes on boats in the ocean. But tell us about this one incident that is provoking the most sort of scrutiny.
Yes, well, I think the context is important. There have been 22 strikes on boats in the Caribbean, and the United States military has killed 87 people in those strikes. There are serious concerns about whether those strikes as a whole are lawful. Because most experts would say this is not a war. The Trump administration is trying to argue that it's at war with these criminal drug organizations. But normally they're considered criminals. And in peacetime, you can't just kill somebody, even a suspected criminal, unless they are, unless it's a last resort. They're threatening lethal force against you or something like that. So if it's not a war, killing people without due process, that's murder. But the administration is saying that the United States is at war with these different criminal drug organizations, but they really haven't provided any evidence that these organizations are kind of waging war on the United States with weapons of war. But even if we assume that there is a war, a lawful war that is taking place, the laws of war set some rules about how you use force in war. And the boat strike from September 2nd is causing a lot of controversy right now because there's new reporting that shows that not only was there an initial strike aimed at the 11 people on board, but that there were survivors. There were 2 survivors. And then that there was a second strike killing those survivors who had climbed up onto an overturned, capsized boat, and they were waving their arms. And so under the law of war, it's illegal. In fact, it's criminal to kill shipwrecked persons. In fact, the Department of Defense Law of War Manual uses that as an example of a war crime. So there's a lot of concern about this second strike.
I find this fascinating because the argument then around this strike oscillates between the strike itself, but then also referring to the law of war. And I think this is where there's a slight sort of technical difficulty, perhaps, in the argument around whether this is a war or not. Some are suggesting that referring to war crimes may offer legitimacy to the Trump administration's argument that they are at war. And I wonder what your take is on that. Do we need to be careful with the language around that legally?
Well, I mean, I think it is important to be careful about the language around that, as I was saying, because, yeah, most experts would say this isn't a war. But at the same time, I think it is important to scrutinize it in the very terms that the administration is using, because even under those terms, this would be a deeply and clearly illegal criminal act and a deeply immoral act.
That's really interesting. So then, I wonder how the law actually works here. The Trump administration, as we say, says they're fine. They're in a state of war with these drug cartels, but legal professionals outside the administration seem to be, I would suggest, largely critical, actually. So how does that impasse get resolved? Does the administration have supremacy here?
Well, one thing I would note is that allies of the United States, including reportedly the UK, Canada, Colombia, and other countries, have actually refused to provide any intelligence to the United States that might be used in these strikes. And I think that's a real indication of the way in which not just experts, but other countries view this claim that this is a war as highly, highly dubious and don't want to be implicated in these strikes. In terms of what the consequences of this are, I mean, I think it really potentially undermines the legitimacy and the credibility of the U.S. military. It certainly could impact our ability to work with our allies. It certainly is in this instance.
Yeah, it's interesting to try to determine what the underlying motivation is. And I was looking back at 2019, where the first Trump administration had imposed oil sanctions that were pretty crippling, actually, on Venezuela. They'd recognized an opposition leader as Venezuela's rightful president. There was billions of dollars in assets blocked, and in 2020 there was warships moved near the country's coast. And so there is this history and precedent of Trump building pressure on Venezuela. I just wonder if there is a motivation of regime change here from the Trump administration, and actually if there are any legal and justifiable and reasonable routes to that, of which these attacks, these boat strikes, are part of the picture.
Yeah, well, they've had really shifting explanations of what these actions are about. I mean, with respect to the boat strikes, they've said it's about drugs. They've said that these drug gangs are kind of narco terrorists waging war on the United States. But yes, the administration has made statements critical of Maduro. The president has suggested that there may be strikes on land soon. It's unclear whether this is about regime change or about putting further pressure on the drug traffickers. Although, of course, Trump has spoken about fentanyl, and that's not the drug that that it would be the focus of the attacks, if there are any, on drug facilities in Venezuela. I mean, it's hard to find a legal justification for this under international law, which prohibits the use of force by one state in the territory of another without that state's consent, except in some very, very limited circumstances. One of them is if the state is waging an armed attack on the other state, and the administration hasn't given any evidence that Venezuela is attacking the United States. So there would be really serious concerns about the use of lethal force in Venezuela, or the use of force in Venezuela to strike these so-called drug storage locations as well.
To what extent, Laura, is it problematic that evidence hasn't been presented of these things that you've outlined already in our conversation at this point? Because that seems to me, as somebody who is ignorant about such things, but it seems to be the wrong way round, that you should present the evidence, then take the action. Is presenting evidence retrospectively legitimate?
Well, I mean, first, if you look at the boat strikes, I think the lack of information provided is very concerning, because we don't even know. I mean, there's this issue of whether or not it's a war, but even if you accept their explanation that it is a war, they're not providing information about who these people are. They say they're part of these drug gangs, but we don't know what confidence they have in that. There have been reports that some of the people might be, smuggled migrants or fishermen, and not even members of the drug gangs that they say that they're targeting. So that lack of information is very concerning. And similarly, with respect to the intentions regarding Venezuela, it's been very muddled. So it's very unclear what the policy actually is.
And just a final one for you. I noted that we've referred often to sort of last resort or exceptional circumstances in terms of the legal justification for these sorts of actions. Can you see any evidence that this could be a last resort, that this could be exceptional circumstance, and that argument would carry?
Without more information, I certainly haven't seen it.
Yeah. So we're operating in a grey area here, where we're operating without the information, and that is the problem. What could the punishment be for the Trump administration? Whose job is it to hold them to account in this circumstance?
Well, as I mentioned, I think that, the allies of the United States
Yeah. I'm
could
wondering
take a
if Congress
stand.
has any role, I suppose, Laura, because
Oh,
Congress declares war.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Congress is conducting an investigation here, but I think they should be doing much, much more to investigate the boat strikes as a whole. I mean, they're focused quite a bit on this September 2nd strike, but as we've discussed, the basis for the whole operation is problematic. And then, yes, of course, Congress has the power to declare war in our Constitution, and there has been no either declaration of war or specific authorization by Congress to use military force here. And so this is also arguably a sort of a power grab by the executive, by the president, vis-a-vis Congress, and should be very concerning to Congress. So yes, Congress should be doing much more. I do think it is important to note that there has been bipartisan concern in Congress raised about these strikes and about the September strike in particular, and that's important.
Laura, I just want to ask you one question then about the Supreme Court, which is going to consider this attempt to end birthright citizenship in the US. Can you just explain to us how that might go?
Yeah, well, first, I just want to note that the U.S. Constitution has a really important provision which provides that all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States. And this is unusual. Not a lot of countries have this rule, but it means that people who are born in the United States, and it's been interpreted to mean that people who are born to parents who may or may not be here in the United States lawfully, those people born in the United States are U.S. citizens. And it's a very important provision of our Constitution that was added after the Civil War. And it's been interpreted by the Supreme Court to mean what I just said. The Trump administration, President Trump, issued an executive order shortly after he was inaugurated, in which he said that people who were born to parents who were not in the United States legally, who were on certain short-term visas, they would not be entitled to citizenship. And the lower courts have found that they've invalidated that order and said that it was unconstitutional. But our Supreme Court just decided to take this case. It'll be a very, very important case that will be considered this year, and we should expect oral arguments sometime within the next several months and a decision by the end of June.